who was one of the first people Tommy ran into in Denver? Jeff Cook.
Okay, well, it sounds like the beginning of a bad novel, but it was a cold, wintry night in Denver. And I had a band at the time called Crosstown Bus, which we were rehearsing in a dress shop, in the basement of a dress shop down on about 15th and Welton. And it was a blizzardy night, you know, and we were in the middle of playing, and we'd stopped for some reason, and we heard this windows rattling, and I thought maybe it was the wind or something, but it kept happening, and so we went upstairs, and there was a kid in a big fur coat, standing there with a guitar case, you know, at the door, you know, just kind of looking in the door, and we opened it, and he said, "Hey, man, can I come in and jam?" And, you know, of course, we were ready to blow him off, you know. We wanted to just, hey, get out of here. He's a 15-year-old kid, you know. But he was so persistent that we let him come down and jammed, and he plugged in his guitar. We decided we'd jam on a song, Purple Haze, by Jimi Hendrix. And he played it note for note. It was unbelievable. We sat there with our mouths open, you know, this little kid just ripping off these guitar solos. And he played it note for note, and then he proceeded to turn it around and play it in his style and do different variations on the theme. And needless to say, the next day we fired our guitar player, and Tommy was the guitar player in the band. It was astonishing to, you know, I remember looking around at all the musicians in the room, and they couldn't believe what they were watching, you know. And that's how it began. We found out later that evening that he had run away from Sioux City, Iowa, and hopped on a bus or hitchhiked to Denver, and just was coming from the bus station and heard the music coming out of, you know, out of this dress shop, and just decided to knock and see if he could start meeting some musicians.
The volcano of dreams, a life slowly fading, has erupted and flown up the night.
Jeff and Tommy's band, American Standard, became well known at Denver's Family Dog. But soon, Tommy moved on to Boulder, Colorado, and helped form the now legendary Zephyr, a group easily the equal of any of the famous San Francisco psychedelic-era bands. And while they were a group in the truest sense of the word, the primary focal points were Tommy and Zephyr's vocalist, the late Candy Givens.
Oh, sure, there was magic. I mean, it was very exciting. I mean, you know, here's a girl fronting a band, and though a lot of people either loved her or were repelled by her, she was very exciting as a performer. And here's a young 18-year-old boy who could play guitar like no one has ever heard him, and people were responding to them. They were just bringing in the throngs. And the fact that they would play anywhere, anytime. They would play for any given situation. At any asking, people would, you know, have a benefit, you know, raise some money. Some people lost their home or got thrown out. They'd do a benefit. I mean, they were always willing to play. So I think that's what, you know, brought them their audiences. And they were different, you know, they were different. I mean, I remember someone saying to me once, Tommy's music will mature. This was at the Zephyr time, when he matures. And I looked at them and I thought he was as mature as he was going to get at 18. But I realized later what they meant, because they were just bashing their heads. She was wailing. He was trying to get in as many licks as possible. The sheer purpose of everyone hearing them and thinking this was their last, you know, chance to be heard. But they realized that they, like the second album showed, they mellowed out a lot. They had to, you know, become sophisticated somewhat in their style, because they were very unsophisticated as far as performing and as far as recording was. So I think that they eventually learned that after the second album. But it turned sour because of the disharmony in the group and the need for Candy and David to control the whole situation. I think that's what really was difficult for him. And the fact that they weren't going anywhere. I mean, they were the band of Boulder at the time, but the two albums, you know, were the big breakthrough, and that was wonderful. That was great. A band that, you know, got signed and did 2 albums. It was great. But then eventually, you know, the disharmony, and then they just weren't going there, because I think that dissension is what caused them to, you know, fall apart. But like you said, I mean, the struggles in Boulder at the time were the fact that there was a lack of money. I mean, you could play these clubs in a constant, you know, cycle, you know, rotating them week after week after week, but at one point you would be guaranteed that everyone had heard you. So I think, too, they outgrew the sound, they outgrew each other, and they needed to go on.
Tommy's animosity over how Candy and David mixed the Going Back to Colorado album pushed him over the edge, and in 1972, he quit Zephyr, vowing to me that he would never play in a band behind a female singer ever again. Tommy's next band was his all-time favorite, a group who never released an album because they shunned commerciality, the quintessential rock fusion band, Energy. Partially based on Tommy's bad experience in Zephyr, Energy's first incarnation was all instrumental. But eventually, Jeff Cook, someone Tommy could trust, was added as vocalist.
I've been trying to get away from what holds me here. There seems to be no explanation for anything. Taken by a passing wind, why don't you stand still? Caught in a cat's cradle, God only knows who made it. Tired and moaning, rested and shaking.
Well, I think that you and I in past conversations have sort of touched on this. This was probably the closest that Tommy came to realizing his ideal band. You know, this was what he wanted to do. It was a synthesis of different musical styles, and it was a group of personalities that he felt comfortable, you know, with and could experiment with. You know, we were very lighthearted about our approach to playing, but very serious about the music that we played. And it was a very non-compromising band. You know, we would not make allowances for what other people wanted, you know. And that was something we were faced with constantly. We'd go to clubs, we'd be playing in bars, we'd get booked, and they'd tell us to turn down, or they'd tell us to change this or change that or play the hits, and we said no, time and time again. And it was hard to do because we weren't living on a lot of money, you know. But we sacrificed that because you know, it was really for the sake of trying to do exactly what we wanted to do at the time. Now, you must remember that basically what we were was a blues-based bar band opening up at Tulagi's for, you know, John Lee Hooker or, you know, B.B. King or whoever might be coming through, Albert King, Big Mama Thornton. We'd come out and play a set, then that artist would come out and we'd back them up, you know. That was the essence of what we did. But musically, when we did our set, or when we were playing on our own, not opening for somebody, what we did was heavy metal jazz fusion, I would say. Now, there really wasn't a heavy metal then. We were loud. We were unbelievably loud. Tommy played through 2 or 3 100-watt Marshall amps, you know, and the rest of the band did their best to stay up with him, you know, volume-wise. So on that level, we were very heavy and cutting edge. But there was a jazz element because all the players were much more musical than a typical rock musician would be. You know, the keyboardist, the bass player, they all had jazz roots. And there was a time in early Energy when Jeremy Steig, the flautist from New York, had come down, and we played with him. That's where the name Energy came from. Jeremy Steig had an album called Energy, and that's where we got the name. So we were experimenting with that kind of music, and how do you make that work in a rock and roll framework, you know? And that's where it all kind of came from. But there were no boundaries for us. I mean, if we wanted to play, if Tommy wanted to whip out his steel guitar and we wanted to play a straight-ahead Hank Williams type country song, we'd do it. If we wanted to play polka music, we'd do it, because we love just goofing musically with each other. We had gotten word, we were playing at a club here in town on Colfax, and I can't remember the name of the club, but we had gotten word that some executives from CBS Records were coming to see us that night about signing us to a record contract. We had to do 2 shows that night. So it was time to go on the first show, and we were all a bit nervous and excited, and we looked out in the audience, and sure enough, there was Barry Fay with several, record company executives, and we went out and we just kicked. We were fabulous. I say in all humility, we were really good, And they came backstage and said, "You guys were wonderful. Your deal is as good as made. Great, terrific." And so as soon as they said, "We've got to go, we've got to leave, we're going to go on, and we've got some other things to do." So we started celebrating in between shows and drinking grain alcohol and, just going wild. And needless to say, by the end of our time off, and it came time to play, none of us could even stand up. And we went out, and it was horrible. Well, the record company stayed. Now, to some people, that might be a high point, I mean a low point, but to me, that was a high point because we totally blew it. We absolutely blew it, but we forgave each other and went on, And to me, that's a very special thing that happens amongst people that love one another and care for one another, But we absolutely blew it. We blew the audition,
The Energy experience, while exhilarating musically, was a financial disaster. But by honing his progressive chops in Energy, Tommy had become the heir apparent to the master, Jimi Hendrix. Accordingly, he became the darling of the New York jazz fusion world, and in 1973 recorded his finest guitar playing on record, Billy Cobham's Spectrum album.
Quite honestly, it was really just a session. It was just going to do an album in New York at first. This is what we thought. He couldn't believe Billy Cobham was calling him up and wanting him to come play on an album. He just couldn't believe it. But the chance to go to New York and play with jazz musicians of that caliber was just mind-boggling. And the opportunity was just phenomenal because the eventual outcome was brilliant. It was just brilliant. I mean, I cannot believe today how that album sounds and what he did on that album. But it didn't surprise me because this was a format, a chance for him to suddenly do what he loved. And to play on something like this, did he shine? Because he just thought to himself, well, maybe they just want me to lay back and, play a few licks. He had no idea they were going to let him play as much as he did, with that many musicians. But he was the guitar player, and he showed them, and they just were blown away. And I think that, it was just a nice time between the James Gang and Energy to do again, like I said, the jazz and what he wanted to do. But it ended up just being a one-album thing. And